We all know that barbecue's good, but it's even better when it's enjoyed with good friends. You can pull resources, buy one of everything on the menu, eat it in good company, and go home happy. Don't believe me? Just ask the Barbecue Bros, three North Carolina natives who launched a website and perpetual road trip focused on experiencing barbecue in all forms and locations. Wait a minute. You don't have to ask the question. That's what we're going to do today as we welcome one of the bros, Tommy, AKA Monk, to the Low and Slow Barbecue Show. Thanks for joining us today, Tommy.
Hey, Jigger. Thank you for having me, and excited for the conversation.
Yeah, and we're going to find out all about the Barbecue Bros, how they got started, where they're headed next, and we'll also get advice you can use when you are ready to explore uncharted barbecue spaces on your own. First, a quick reminder, visit us at lowandslowbarbecueshow.com. That's lowslowbbqshow.com to get more barbecue stories, blogs, and barbecue recipes. While you're at lowslowbbqshow.com, be sure to subscribe to our newsletter, The Lowdown. The Lowdown delivers the latest Carolina barbecue news directly to your inbox on Tuesday mornings. In fact, you might even get a link to the Barbecue Bros' latest restaurant review produced by today's guest. But before we get into all those reviews, let's just find out more about the Barbecue Bros. Tommy, what is the Barbecue Bros? Tell our audience what it's all about.
Sure. Barbecue Bros is really it's a blog. It's kind of an old style blog that we created, in May of 2012. And, we have a little bit of a social media, Instagram presence, obviously kind of more picture focused there, but, the words and kind of the longer form, posts appear on the blog. So it really is kind of an old school barbecue blog.
Yeah. So, well, tell us how you got started. Hey, you're creating a blog, you're putting a bunch of stuff out there, but take us to the beginning. How did you guys get started with this?
Sure. Way back in May 2012, I had actually been living in Charlotte, which is where myself and at the time, Speedy, one of the other bros, lived. We had an idea. Well, we went searching for barbecue. And so we consulted, the Yelp reviews, which, what we found was probably the best source at the time to kind of figure out what would be the best barbecue in Charlotte.
Mm-hmm.
And we came away, pretty disappointed, honestly, with what was listed as the number one barbecue place in Charlotte
Yeah.
back in, 2012. And so from that point on, we kind of said, well, why don't, we've eaten a lot of barbecue in our life. Why don't we figure out what the best barbecue in the Charlotte area is, and maybe other people will be interested. Let's start a blog. Let's start a Twitter. This was before Instagram. Let's just kind of document our findings there. So it really started with, let's try all the places we can in Charlotte and find out what the best barbecue place is according to our own tastes.
Okay. Now you started out on Charlotte, but you've expanded. So how has the mission and the goal evolved since that 2012 mission statement?
Yeah, that's right. And actually, pretty early on, I think that after kind of making the decision, we posted on Twitter that we were going to start a barbecue blog. And one of the other bros, who goes by Rudy, was actually living in Austin at the time. He saw that and asked if we wanted a beef correspondent. And we were like, absolutely. I mean, that, get additional coverage in the area. And personally, up to that point, I hadn't had a lot of barbecue in Texas. So I was, curious for him to kind of explore that area and document it for the blog. So, we had some Texas stuff early on. And then generally when I'm traveling or any other guys are traveling for work or for, pleasure or whatnot, if there is a barbecue spot, good or bad, oftentimes, bad, we would check it out for purposes of documenting on the blog, writing it up, reviewing, and kind of just, anywhere we went, if there was somewhere half decent that was worth trying, that's what we would do.
Okay, so all right, there's Speedy, Rudy, and Monk. You want to
Yes.
take us into the names, and I know you guys kind of go back a little way, so take us into your history a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. We all went to high school together. Rudy and I were the same class. Speedy was just a year behind us, but we all hung out going back to high school and still keep up to these days. I actually just saw those guys recently, and we'll hopefully have another review with them shortly, which is kind of few and far between these days. But in any case, we decided to pick kind of pen names, so to speak, for the blog. No particular reason. We just thought it'd be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And so Monk is based off of the Monk family, who owns and has run the Lexington barbecue restaurant. I
Oh
think
yeah.
recently met, well, a couple years back, met Nathan Monk. He is, I
Hmm.
believe, the fourth generation Monk, if I'm not
Hmm.
mistaken. Um, Kenny or Speedy, he picked another Lexington barbecue joint, Speedy's, which I think he had a fondness for from going back in college. He went to Wake Forest University. And then Rudy kind of refers to the chain of Texas barbecue restaurants that are kind of gas station, started out of a gas station. And I think there's a bunch of them now, but that's kind of the first thing that came to mind. Maybe one of his early, Texas experiences with barbecue once he moved there shortly after college.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense. You got some pen names that are tributes to the
Right.
heritage of barbecue in the Carolinas. So,
That's
well,
right. Yeah.
what will people find when they go to your website? And of course, they can do that as barbecuebros.co. That's
Yep.
bros.co. But
Yep.
take folks through what they'll find when they come to the website.
Yeah, I mean, we still, I still publish, reviews, straight up reviews of in the same format that we've been doing for most of the past 12 years now.
Mm.
You know, those, post when we can. There was a period where I was posting at least once a week for most of a year. It slowed down a little bit, but there's well over 350 reviews on the site, going
Wow.
back the full 12 years. There are, you know, what we like to call Friday finds, where if there is a podcast such as this one, which we linked to and featured a few times, podcasts, YouTube videos, you know, anything like that, where it's something where we kind of spotlight just something new that we found that's worth kind of listening or watching to or watching. That's what we call our Friday find, and then occasionally I'll do a roundup of links that are barbecue related, whether it's um, North Carolina focus, which is what I tend to try to focus on. But if barbecue news, and Texas always has barbecue news, and if there's anything kind of in the hot spots around, I'll round those up in what I call a link down. It's kind of a portmanteau for link rundown, which I've kind of used in a few different barbecue or blog formats going back a few years now. So those are kind of the three main posts that we do, and kind of what you'll find on the blog.
Okay, yeah, and I love visiting the website. You got a nice map, and it shows the stars of the place that you visited and reviewed. And it's
Right.
if I know I'm going somewhere in North Carolina and I haven't been before, I pull up the map and say, well, what have the bros reviewed in this region? So it's a good way to find good barbecue. But take me into the rating system. How do you guys review a restaurant? What's all involved in that?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said earlier, this really hasn't changed in the 12 plus years that we've been doing the blog. We like to rate the experience on not only the meats, the sides. We rate each meat individually. Depending on what we order. We rate the sides. If there's any desserts, which usually there isn't room for desserts, we kind of group those in with the sides. And then we do like to kind of, if we're going to a restaurant, like to comment a little bit on what we call the atmosphere or ambiance. So does it feel like a kind of sterile chain barbecue restaurant, even if the barbecue itself is good?
Mm.
Or is it kind of a mom and pop or a classic barbecue joint? That it doesn't weigh in as much as the meats and the food, but it certainly plays a role. So we like to kind of acknowledge that as well, both in the write up itself as well as the ratings. And then we rate each of those on a 0 to 5 hog scale. We do half hogs, so between 0 and 5 hogs, 5 being the highest. And then we kind of it's an inexact science. I don't exactly average them all up. I kind of weight them in my mind, and we'll come up with a kind of overall rating based off of atmosphere, ambiance, all of the meats, and the sides. So that's kind of what we start. Honestly, we started with that really early on. I think with that first review, we had more or less the same rating system then as we do now for the most recent review I posted on the blog.
And that's a pretty clever review method with the hogs, 0 to 5 hogs. And I visited to the website, and again, you can go check out the 0 hogs or the 5 hogs, and you've got them all broke down between
Right.
0 to 5, and which ones are the best and maybe not so good. As you
Yeah.
put these reviews out there into the world, what kind of response have you been receiving from, first of all, from the pit masters, these guys that are running the barbecue restaurants? When they get, let's say they get a 5-star, how do they respond? Are you hearing anything back from these folks?
I think people are reading the blog less and less, or at least commenting on it. I think most of the feedback we get would be, if we are, posting on Instagram and tagging the restaurant or the pitmaster, if we happen to know, what their handle is. Um, then, whether it's stories or the actual post, then, we get a lot of just, thank you for coming in. Occasionally we'll get to know some of the actual pitmasters themselves, Garen, as well as his wife Kelly from John G's. Is
Hmm.
kind of early on. We got to, they reached out, invited, me to check them out, early on, and got to taste their barbecue, and then kind of got to know them over the years. So that's probably kind of the most the example where we got to know them the most and interact kind of frequently. Occasionally, sometimes it's just very thanks for coming. Hope you enjoyed it type comments on Instagram stories or posts. So honestly, I don't get a ton of feedback directly from pitmasters or restaurants themselves.
Okay, well, you mentioned that you have folks inviting you. John G invited you to come out. Do you get those types of invitations from barbecue restaurants often?
I think occasionally, it kind of comes in waves. There are certainly times where folks will reach out. Oftentimes, it's kind of community barbecues. Like, hey, a recent one I got was someone in a couple hours west does. I think it's a church fundraiser barbecue, but he sent me some photos saying, "Hey, I'd love to have you," because he kind of he cooks it the old way with a burn barrel and embers and kind of direct heat. So he's love to have you come check it out. I've gotten a few of those, and then in terms of the restaurants, yeah, occasionally we'll get some invites directly from the pit masters, or even if they're big enough and they have kind of PR folks, get
Hmm.
some invites there to come check them out. So a wide variety of different kind of invites come, to different types of barbecues or fundraisers or things to just check out. I'm always flattered where people think to invite me to those type of things. So yeah, that's it kind of comes, like I said, in waves.
Yeah, 12 years you've been doing this. You've kind of been sticking to a good routine. I'm sure it kind of comes in waves, the production, just like the audience does. But look
Sure,
ahead,
yeah.
look to the future. What does the horizon hold for you guys?
I think this has definitely become, less of a focus for the other two bros, and
Mhm.
they contribute when they can, which I totally get. They have kind of busy lives. I really see it as I keep going because I just find that I really love, kind of you know the whole experience. I like to document. I love to take photos. I like to put my thoughts out. I just kind of the whole old school blogging. I've been doing it for decades at this point. I still really enjoy that, and I think that's probably where the future is if the other guys are able to contribute occasionally, great. We were all three together in Portland, Oregon, and went to a great place called Matt's Barbecue recently. So hopefully we'll get to kind of collaborate on that one. But if they aren't kind of sending in kind of the one-off reviews that they're doing by themselves, that's okay. I'll probably be keeping it going, as long as I still feel like like you said, it kind of comes in fits and starts. But I feel like even if I've taken a break, once I get going again, I really kind of, the creative juices start flowing, and I kind of get really excited about it kind of all over again. So I don't know that there's going to be a ton of, big changes in the future. I do like, I mentioned kind of the three types of posts earlier. I do like to kind of step back and maybe write a little bit more, wider or broader stories about, perhaps, what I'm seeing in whether it's, Charlotte itself or kind of, kind of wider reaching stories. So, I think those are kind of the things that, I like to kind of um, try in the future, but I've done a little bit up to this point and maybe try to continue those different types of posts, not just straight up reviews.
Okay. And you mentioned collaborating with your friends out in the Pacific Northwest there. And I led the episode with this claim, and I'm gonna ask you now, as I promised, why do you feel like barbecue is better enjoyed with friends?
Well, there's obviously the communal aspect of barbecue. Whether it's you're smoking in your backyard, it's always fun to invite folks over, even if they're not directly contributing to the cooking. Hanging out, listening to music, drinking a beverage if you're into that. There's always that. And then oftentimes, if you want to try all the meats, you need a lot of other mouths to help you eat it, or otherwise you're going to take a bunch of leftovers, and which you may not eat later on. So I think even just purely from a waste perspective, you want to, especially if the food's good, all of the effort that's gone into cooking it, um, it and you want to try all the meats. I think it's the communal aspect comes into it as well when you're eating with friends at a restaurant, but definitely just from practical logical purposes, it's fun. And then of course you got the communal aspects as you're eating it, enjoying it, critiquing it. There's some disagreements, things like that. So I think that's kind of my answer why it's better to eat with friends.
Camaraderie and conversation, good times together. Those are all great
Absolutely.
reasons to get barbecue together. So as you guys have been out, I think you dropped a number there just a moment ago. How many barbecue joints do you feel like you've been to during all this time?
Yeah, there's I just checked this recently. There's over 350 reviews on the website. Some of those will be repeat viewings, but I can confidently say well over 300 um, reviews of unique restaurants. I probably have been involved in, I don't, two, maybe even three-fourths of those directly, whether I'm eating and writing. Some of the other ones are kind of one-offs for the other guys, as they are, whether they're Texas or traveling across the U.S. or wherever. But yeah, I mean, well over 300 unique kind of reviews on the site.
Are there any restaurants that you've been to that you don't get a review on the site that's either so bad that you don't review it, or you just don't have time, or any of those in that category?
I think we used to kind of relish those bad reviews to a certain extent, and like ripping, whatever restaurant, you know, um, I think we kind of like the idea of that type of post. I think as I've gotten older, I don't want to necessarily disparage anyone who, as long as they're trying. I like to try to find things that I like with each one. So, I'm not going to write kind of a completely negative review, but at the same time, I don't think generally I do try to post something, even if it's short and kind of not focusing too much on the negative. But I do generally try to post something on the blog. I went to the effort, I spent the money, I might as well kind of get some content out of it, I guess is how I look at it.
Yeah, sure. And of course, the media world in 2012, when you guys got started, maybe it was a little bit of fun to kind of poo-poo some of
Right.
these things. The media world
Right.
now is a lot more negative, and I don't think we want to see as much of that. Let's
Yeah.
pump people up, and if it's bad, well, let's
Exactly.
just kind of keep that on the back burner. So,
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
yeah. So, how deep into the barbecue world are you? I know you're eating, you're reviewing, you're reporting, pictures,
Yep.
videos. Are you
Yep.
cooking too?
I am a backyard cook. You know, I think the easy thing to do, especially being from North Carolina, would be pork shoulders. And honestly, since the pandemic, I pulled out the old Weber kettle, which at this point is probably nearly 20 years old. And I find that I really especially during the pandemic, you had the time, you could cook over charcoal. I found that I really enjoy using that Weber kettle, even though it's parts of it are starting to fall apart. Um, but for the most part, it's really holding up, and I'm able to get like really good pork shoulders out of it. So that's kind of the main things I do. Occasionally, I'll do ribs. I don't mess with beef other than like maybe a tri-tip or a kind of a beef tenderloin. I haven't done a brisket in a long time. But I think the coolest thing I did, which I'd like to kind of replicate, is I did a whole hog in my backyard. Cinder block pit,
Mm,
rebar and all.
yeah.
Father's Day weekend of 2018. So had a big party because obviously that's a ton of food. But I'd really love to do that again. I just I kind of thought about it and started to do it a few times, but just haven't pulled the trigger to to do another whole hog in the backyard again. But hopefully soon.
Well, I can definitely validate you on the Weber kettle. I have a Smoky Mountain that I know I've had for 20 years, and it still
Yeah.
holds up. And that
Oh
that
man.
bars, I've replaced the grate in there a couple times, but man, it still works
Right.
fantastic. Love to use that
Yeah.
thing. And so, if the
Absolutely.
timing's right and you get ready for that whole hog, be sure and send us an invitation.
Oh, absolutely. I will be inviting friends again. Going back to there's a lot of food there, so I don't want it to
Yeah.
go to waste. I'd love to, have people try it. So absolutely.
Yeah. So, what do you feel like has been your most memorable day of barbecue? Any best bites or exotic life list stops that you've been to?
I think probably so. I guess you kind of mentioned the map earlier, and being in kind of Charlotte and growing up in kind of the Piedmont region, just north of Lexington. We all grew up in High Point, North Carolina. That's really the style of barbecue that I've explored the most. And so I don't have as much experience out east. But a few years back, for my oldest daughter's gymnastics tournament was in Greenville, North Carolina. So over kind of 1.5 days, went to Bee's Barbecue, Skylight Inn, and then the next day was a Sunday. So the only kind of real barbecue joint that was open was a Sam Jones Barbecue, which is in itself is really good. But
Mm.
kind of hit those three in succession, over the course of a weekend, and then actually a few days later. There's kind of a whole hog theme to this
Hmm.
this little trip, and went to Palmyra Barbecue when they were
Mm.
still at the food stall in Charleston, North Carolina, and tried their whole hog. So that was kind of over a couple of days, but hitting a bunch of whole hog places. I think I'd love to always hit more, but with the family and this was a gymnastics trip, I felt pretty good about hitting those four kind of in quick succession.
What about the opposite side of the coin, a forgettable day of barbecue?
Yeah, I mean, there's been places where, speaking of gas station barbecue and Rudy's earlier, there was a true gas station with a restaurant attached to it. Probably was like, an old, fast food or fried chicken place, and they had barbecue, and always hopeful of those hole in the wall places, but this place in kind of upstate South Carolina just I don't think it's in business any longer. It really did not hit the mark. The barbecue itself was most likely cooked a day or two before and just kind of microwaved or zapped for us, so completely dry, almost inedible. Everything else, the hush puppies were clearly from frozen. I think they did actually attempt to do kind of a house made kind of red slaw. But everything else of that meal was kind of completely unsuccessful. There's been other places like we went to a place in Brooklyn where, I know people like to poo poo New York barbecue, but there are some really good places like
Yeah.
Hometown Barbecue and,
Hmm.
and some others. But this was a place in Brooklyn that really was just missed the mark pretty badly. The brisket was kind of roast beef consistency, very dry, rubbery. So those are probably the few that come to mind. The other guys have had some zero hog reviews. I think one was in Arizona in Sedona. The other actually was in Raleigh. And so I was kind of taking a look, and there are some zero hog reviews. None of them are mine. The ones I did were probably more like a one hog, but yeah, those are probably kind of amongst the three of us, kind of the worst experiences we've had with barbecue.
You mentioned the restaurant that closed that wasn't a great experience. And out of all the 300 reviews that you've got up there, do you ever spend any time going through and saying, okay, these guys have closed, we're going to take them off of there? Any updating or refreshing, or once it goes out there, it's out there and you don't fool with any of that anymore?
Um, I could be better about that. I do like to update the map where, I like you said, I like to star the ones that are kind of exceptional. I always link to the review. If it's closed, ideally, I think I'm going to always keep it out there, but maybe note that it's closed in both on the map and ideally on the blog post. But that's kind of just if I think about it or I come across it, I'll make an update. But I guess in general, it's just once it's out there, and maybe I'll go back later and kind of note it that it was closed, or maybe I won't.
When you go out there and you're visiting these restaurants and you're trying to figure out what it's going to be, is there anything that you order in particular that you sort of base your opinions on? Is this like the benchmark? I'm gonna always get this and kind of make
Yeah.
a decision on how this restaurant is.
Well, I always like to, trust the restaurant in terms of if they're a Texas joint, I'm gonna try the brisket. Obviously, if they're a North Carolina joint, I'm gonna try the pork. Um, if it's kind of more of a what's referred to as an international house of barbecue where they have all the styles, and I can pick from any number of them because they're not necessarily one style or the other at the restaurant, I'll always default to pork, just kind of being from North Carolina,
Mhm.
growing up near Lexington. Whether it's kind of Lexington or Eastern or they don't have a particular style, I'll always kind of try the pork. If it's not kind of clear, like if it's a Texas place, yeah, I'm going to try the brisket and the ribs and the sausage if it's all on the menu. But otherwise, yeah, I'll always try the pork.
What do you generally look for in a barbecue restaurant?
I think the biggest thing is kind of authenticity. If it's, clearly that can be done. If it's an old kind of classic restaurant, it just kind of it oozes the authenticity. Just because it's maybe a newer kind of chain restaurant, it can still be authentic in some ways. Even if it's kind of a shinier, kind of cleaner type place. I always am going to look to see what their smoker is. If there's a wood pile out back, even with always preferring the wood smoke, kind of um, classic type of smokers. But if there is like a Southern Pride or a gas fire, are they even adding wood? Or are they just solely relying on kind of the electricity? So I always like to I don't love to see a gasser, but if there is a wood pile, then at least they're kind of trying some things. So I think that's probably the biggest thing in terms of woodpile and the authenticity and kind of I think it goes back to the atmosphere and ambiance of the restaurant I was mentioning earlier for the ratings.
Okay, so you guys got started in a place where we need to find the barbecue of Charlotte and let everybody know what the good barbecue is. If
Yeah,
I'm now that now you've created a great resource for North Carolina, but let's say Joe Q Public can go to barbecuebros.co and
right.
plan our journey. But let's say we don't have access to that. What do you feel like is the key or the secret to planning a good barbecue road trip and finding a destination in an unfamiliar place?
I always like to check different resources. So if it's a place with a Texas joint, Texas Monthly, Daniel Vaughn, obviously
Mm,
everyone knows him. He's kind of his word is kind of is kind of golden. So that's always a resource I'll check. If there's an eater, the website eater, if they do
mhm.
like a barbecue list, generally I feel like those writers tend to know what they're doing. Not always, but I think that's always something to kind of check for. If there's a local, uh, city magazine or alt weekly, kind of that's people on the ground that live in the city that are trying the barbecue. I'll always check to see if there's anything like that. Um, and then a friend of mine, John Tanner, he's got a great barbecue blog. So if there's any place that he's happened to check, so I think I try to check a few different sources if the restaurant's going to be there. If the restaurant's not on any of those, then um, I'll look at pictures. Whether going back to Yelp, if there's pictures on the site that other people have taken, hopefully they've taken pictures of the smoker or the wood pile. That's always helpful. If there's any kind of random blogs, maybe they're defunct, but they have good reviews. So it's really just a lot of research, and then failing that, I'll just take a leap of faith and try it out, and that's where maybe I'll get lucky, but that also could be a bad experience.
Sure. So you mentioned Yelp there, and you mentioned it later on. Where does
Yeah.
Yelp and Google reviews fit in the hierarchy of reference information?
I don't typically, based off that, not only just based off that initial experience in Charlotte with what was then the number one restaurant, but I think in general, I don't necessarily trust Yelp when it comes to barbecue. So that's where I'll see, if there's Yelpers that have taken, great photos. Again, hopefully it's of the smoker, of a wood pile, not just kind of like the decor or whatnot.
Mhm.
Um, Google Maps or kind of Google, again, kind of the same thing. Not necessarily worrying too much about the content of the reviews, but if they've got additional photos, kind of those are probably the furthest down on the pecking order. Kind of those two. Those failing all those other resources I mentioned earlier, then I'll check those and see if I can get a better sense of the restaurant.
Okay. You started out in 2012 and it was a Charlotte topic and it's been a
Yeah,
long time. That's 12 years for Charlotte barbecue. And I know you've
yeah.
written about this and talked about this before, but tell me how you feel like the Charlotte barbecue arena or environment or the barbecue community has evolved over those 12 years.
When right before we had the blog, Midwood Smokehouse opened, which has since grown to kind of a regional chain, but
Hmm.
they were truly doing kind of wood smoked barbecue, whereas most places in Charlotte at the time were probably really doing just more of a gas, using a gas or maybe adding some wood. So they were right before we started the blog. We went to them early on, and they were for a while kind of the best barbecue in Charlotte. I think there's been some, fits and starts. There's other places that have come along that um, are doing, true Q wood smoked barbecue. Um, and some of those have kind of survived. Some of those, try it out and then find that, I'm not a restaurateur myself, but, that business is pretty tough. And
Hmm.
so I think, recently within the past year, there's been some new players on the scene that I've really enjoyed. Union Barbecue, which is a food truck that is doing kind of Tex-Mex barbecue. I tried them for the first time recently. I think they started within Charlotte probably within the past year. Really enjoy them. Resident Culture started a barbecue. That's a brewery that started
Hmm.
a barbecue program. You know, taking hiring a pitmaster from Noble Smoke, and you know tried them as well, and found that they're kind of doing some really interesting things. So I think there was some kind of contraction, especially because of COVID. A lot of places closed, and I'm hopeful that some more places, not only kind of the homegrown places I mentioned that have kind of popped up, but also it'd be great to just have someone like a Sam Jones or a Rodney Scott open a restaurant in Charlotte just to kind of help elevate the barbecue scene. Even someone like Brian Furman, who has done Savannah and Atlanta, but is a Charlotte native. I've been wanting for him to potentially open something in Charlotte, you know, since he kind of came on the scene. So someone like that, like a well-known pitmaster, I'd love to see open. Whether maybe not their first restaurant, but like if they're kind of expanding to Charlotte, open their second or third or whatnot restaurant, and just elevate the scene. So I think it's continuing to grow. I think it's stagnated for a while. It's growing again, and hopefully, just more folks will kind of continue to get inspired by the quality of barbecue that's open in the recent past, and kind of do their own spin on it.
You mentioned a couple of folks that we've had on the show. Edmar Samoas from Resident Culture Brewing Company. He's the pit
Yep.
master there and came from Noble, and as well as Matt Berry from Midwood Smokehouse. All these guys we've talked to, they've got a great story. And a Sweet Lou's there in Charlotte. It
Yep.
would be
Yep.
really
Sweet
cool if
Lou's
Brian
great.
Furman came up. We had him on the show here a little while back, and I kind of pressed him on that topic, and he said, "Don't count me out." So it's
Okay.
not out of the question. Keep your fingers crossed. Once he gets
Yeah.
stuff going in Atlanta again, which I think he's working on this month.
Right.
Hopefully, he'll expand over here to Charlotte. So,
And actually, I'm glad you mentioned Lewis from Sweet Lou's, because
mhm,
obviously they cook over, he cooks over wood,
mm,
but then also the Carolina Barbecue Festival, which I know you guys
mhm.
were involved in and have promoted. I think bringing other pit masters to Charlotte, seeing that there is an audience for barbecue, real barbecue, I think is a great thing, and can only help kind of elevate the city's barbecue. So I just want to make sure I did mention kind of Lewis.
Yeah, and Lewis has got a big event, the next Carolina Barbecue Festival, sort of mini festival coming up in, I guess,
Yeah.
October around a Carolina Panthers game. So you can go enjoy
Yep.
some whole hog barbecue and do that thing. So it's cool. I'm like you. I'm looking forward to seeing how that Carolina Barbecue Festival continues to expand in the region.
Absolutely.
Let's take it out of barbecue. What do you eat when you're not eating barbecue?
Um, my wife could eat probably Mexican food every day of the week if she had to, and I'm kind of right there with her. Probably not quite as much enthusiasm, but anytime she mentions a Mexican, whether it's kind of a kind of a kind of hole in the wall Mexican, or kind of if it's kind of an upscale, we're always game to try different places. We've got a great sushi place that we like in Charlotte. Pizza. I'm really not picky. I'll eat most things. My kids not so much, but those are probably the favorites, I'd say.
You mentioned the wife and you mentioned the kids a couple of times here. How
Yeah.
did they all tolerate your barbecue journey and your passion for meat smoke?
Right. Yeah, I think tolerate is definitely the right word. So, especially if it's, a trip where, like I mentioned earlier, some of those stops in Eastern North Carolina around Greenville, I didn't take them to all of them, but they went to, all but one or two. And, cause there was a few more probably on that loop. Um, they tolerate it. Generally, the nice thing is, a lot of barbecue restaurants will have fries, or if they're newer, kind of they'll have like a grilled cheese, so they're not being forced to eat barbecue every place. So chicken fingers, quesadilla or grilled cheese, if that's on the menu plus fries, my kids will be happy. My wife, she's game for it. I think there's been early on she kind of maybe fought it a little bit, but if she's going to eat barbecue, again, that's an easy way to kind of share a big platter and try a bunch of different meats. She's found that she really, a well done brisket, she really loves. She loves, if it's sausage, it's kind of house made and really good. She's become on board, so she doesn't fight it nearly as much as she used to.
We're getting kind of close to the end of our time here, and we're going to get into the low and slow showdown here in just a moment. Before we do, I want to find out, at 12 years, where do you continue to find the interest, the motivation? What really keeps your fire lit now that you've got started and got a decade plus under your belt?
Honestly, I think if I'm in a lull, it's because I haven't been listening to different podcasts like this one or Tales from the Pits or, different, just kind of consuming different content, all the different YouTube videos. I find that once if I haven't done that in a while and I start listening to those types of content, then it kind of, gets the creative juices flowing and kind of reignites the passion. So I'd say that's the biggest thing, is just kind of, the Smoke Sheet, good friends with those guys and kind of look forward to reading that every week, and occasionally contributing. So it's just kind of like seeing other people kind of putting out, different types of content or reading, Texas Monthly, checking that out. So I think that's usually what happens, is I get reignited when I kind of find myself having not kind of been consuming that type of content, and then kind of getting back into it and saying, okay, all right, what can I do now? What can I do different? What's my spin on it?
Okay, low and slow showdown time. We're going to hit these with quick hitters, and maybe we explain some of it. Maybe we just kick it with one word answers. So first of all, you smoke some in your backyard. What is your favorite wood to use in your smoker?
It'll be oak, just because it's so available in North Carolina.
Yeah. So what's the name of the barbecue joint that you grew up on?
So Lexington Barbecue is kind of my favorite joint of all time because it was nearby. But I guess in terms of right in my hometown of High Point, there was Kepley's Barbecue.
And when you say Lexington, you're talking about Honey Monk, of course, as your mom.
That's right. Yep, absolutely.
What is your current barbecue go-to?
Honestly, in Charlotte, it would probably be Sweet Lou's, but in terms of a restaurant that's open every day, I like where the special he's doing, kind of all the different, constantly evolving the menu. So Sweet Lou's would probably be my go-to in Charlotte.
What's your favorite protein to eat? Pork, beef, chicken, turkey, or something else?
It's going to be pork, chopped pork, ideally Lexington style, but any well-done pork.
Favorite side?
Collards. My wife is actually a big collards fan. She can be picky, so I like to always get her input if I am trying collards. But if there's collards on the menu, I'll try that. I guess I'll also mention barbecue hash as well if it's on the menu.
Wow, that is two answers that we don't normally get, because collards is not for everybody, and hash certainly isn't for everybody either. So it's good to get that. And I'm sure since you've been to Palmyra, their collards are fire.
Yes. Yep.
Definitely.
And they have great hash as well. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, they have great hash, great beef cheeks. Everything at Palmyra is good. So favorite dessert?
Banana pudding, hands down.
What is the best state in these United States for barbecue?
Well, of course it's North Carolina.
Of course it is. But what is the best North Carolina style? Eastern, Western, or mustard?
It's my answer is it's what you grew up on, and what I grew up on is Lexington barbecue, Lexington style, Piedmont style barbecue. So that's what I'll say. But I have an appreciation for the others if it's well done.
If it's good, all of it's good, right?
Exactly.
Is it better with or without the sauce?
I think the sauce should be an enhancer, not something that hides. So I think if it's a sandwich, I'll always add slaw and sauce to like a chopped pork sandwich.
Last one, and this is always a toughie for folks. Is barbecue a verb or a noun?
It's a noun. It's clearly a noun.
It is clearly a noun. And that, my friends, is the lowdown from Monk. Tommy, founder of Barbecue Bros. Tommy, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chigger.
You've been listening to the Low and Slow Barbecue Show on the Mesh.tv network of podcast. Be sure to visit us online at lowslowbbqshow.com. That's where you'll find the blog. You can hear other podcast episodes. And if you like what you hear on the Low and Slow Barbecue Show, please be sure to give us a 5-star rating in your favorite podcast network. That helps other people find us. Remember, visit lowslowbbqshow.com and you can subscribe to the Lowdown newsletter, and we'll send the latest podcasts, blogs, recipes, barbecue events, and more all directly to your inbox on Tuesday mornings. Special thanks to our guest, Tommy. Thanks as well to our producer, Andrew Moose, and the whole team at the Mesh.tv network. The Mesh.tv network of podcast. Most especially, thank you for listening to the Low and Slow Barbecue Show. Remember, for the best barbecue and the best barbecue podcast, keep it low and slow.